you shared to your community, right, Jason? So
yes, I did, and
awesome.
and the Archaics Facebook.
Oh, that's great. I'm sure we have a lot of crossover. So, and so I'm sure we're going to see a lot of our regulars. There's Pamela in there. What's up, Pam? I know she's a regular Archaics, and I'm sure Shiva Shampoo will be in here.
I don't know. He's in the Maldives Islands. They might be asleep right now. I'm not sure.
Oh, wow. Good for him. Because is that where he's based? Because I know he's in our chats a lot on our AlphaCast.
Yeah, that's where he lives. That's where he lives.
Oh, well, that's impressive. He makes the time for us. We appreciate that because he's in our chat a lot during our live streams. So,
okay.
Yeah. Well, hey, we're here with Jason from Archaics, Jason Brashears. This is our third broadcast. I'm going to hit record and get this bad boy started because this is going to be a highlight of the year, I'm sure. And we want to give Jason a lot of time here. So let's do it, guys. And boom, we're back for another episode of AlphaCast. I'm Mike Winter, and I'm here as always with the magnanimous Dr. Bear Paul Lando. That was the word I was trying to say off the top of my head last episode, Bear.
So you've been practicing.
That's a tongue twister. Yes, we're here coming to you live and direct from the great state of Jefferson, where freedom still reigns supreme. Up here on the glorious Smith River, where we get a little cool off from the heat. We had a bit of a heat wave come in, hit 100 a few days. We're in the river a lot. Bear, it was lovely seeing some images of you down there on Unicorn Island, I hope. Well, I didn't see you actually nude sunbathing, but I figured you guys were having fun there on the 4th. Happy 4th to everybody. Happy Independence Day for all those who celebrated. Hopefully you guys got a little R&R, and we're here today with the great Jason Brashears from Archaics, our third broadcast. So exciting. We're going to go deep into the hijacking of Christianity, the first century AD or CE, however you want to play the game. And I want to get right into it. One thing real quick, July 11th, right around the corner, Bear. The end of COVID officially launches. Jason, we're doing this large event called the End of COVID, which is a terrain-based education platform, over 90 talks, presentations, mini documentaries, waking up the world to the fraud that is germ theory. And
careful what you say here, Michael. We're going to get our third strike.
You know what? They've kind of backed off a little bit on it, but what do you know? I probably should. Yeah. So
real quick on that, just a little in-house business, and Jason, thanks so much for being with us today. And we want to give you all the time here. If you don't mind, just a little bit of in-house. Josh Bigelson of the Bigelson Academy, him and his brother Adam, doing amazing work, carrying on the work of their father. And, I have a long history of life cell microscopy in my terrain medicine career. And their dad, and they're again carrying it on, really pioneered an understanding of the holographic universe and being able to demonstrate how that even outpictures in the blood. So Josh was here giving me some nice tutorials with his microscope. We're already in cahoots with them. I've been giving a few talks on their academy. He was here. We had a good lecture, which we're going to be broadcasting on our AlfaVedic channel very soon under our new little series, which is Off-Grid Elegance. And that will feature not just a lot more going on here at the farm, but also our in-house chats of people that visit the farm. And we'll have a lot of notables like Josh. So that's another one that'll be uploaded very quick. And just a shout out to the Bigelsons at bigelsonsacademy.com. Everybody go there. They've got a lot of interesting things, a lot of services, great services to offer. So Mike, why don't you give our intro and let's get in with Jason here.
One thing I'll say about the Bigelsons, Bear, with Jason here, talk about as above, so below, in the blood, the holograms, right? The holographic presentation is literally happening in our blood that Jason talks about with the holography. So a lot of tie-ins
and I
there.
I was trained in old school German microscopy, and, in my work, because people would come, with illnesses, and I'd be really more focused in on microorganisms and, their whole pleomorphic role in health and helping restore the bioterrain. And then again, the Bigglesons took it to another level with what you're referring to, Michael. And it's more in alignment with where I've gone since my career days, which is the alchemical perspective, as above, so below, as you state. So let's get it started.
Beautiful. Yes, very excited for today's chat. Has Christianity been hijacked? Why were Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the alleged authors of the Synoptic Gospels, never mentioned until 125 years after the events that these writers depict? Were any of them actual members of Jesus's chosen 12? Are the Gospels allegory, Vatican subterfuge, or the authentic word of Old Testament deity? Quote, come to know what is in front of you, and that which is hidden from you will be made clear to you. For there is nothing hidden that will not become manifest. The Nazarene. These are just a few of the topics that returning guest Jason Breshears will address with his trademark enthusiasm and encyclopedic knowledge. Jason draws from a diverse database of ancient texts representing an eclecticity of cultures, traditions, and timelines to weave a masterful tapestry of secrets long hidden and what they may portend. Current global events are deeply rooted in the past, and our discussion will draw upon this relevance to better understand how mankind now can make ready for the final exodus from bondage. For those new to Jason's work, familiarize yourself with his foundational research and concepts introduced in AlphaCast episodes. Are we in a false reality simulacrum? And Breaking the Chains of Historical Cycles, two great shows we've done previously with Jason. And while Jason's simulation theory may be a stretch for some, the depth and breadth of his information base is formidable, while some of the conclusive links drawn are undeniable. Today, Bear, we're going to go into the first century Rome. I will say it's quite apparent with comedians even like Jim Brewer out there recently saying that it's clear we're still under Roman rule. We understand the Roman civic law system is still kind of binding us in certain ways. So I think it's very apparent, as you say, today, this is very relevant to today and what we're going through.
Yes, and myself being a descendant from the Roman gods, I am very conflicted, but hey, it's time to move on and for the Romans to give the reins back to the people. Jason, so good to have you again. We always love having you. Our audience loves it. So we're going to dive a little deeper today. We ended that little intro with people maybe being stretched with the idea of a simulation theory. To me, it's not a theory, and it can be very easily explained with waveform mechanics and the fact that we live in a thought-based electrical universe, and the authentic creator allowed us to play within that simulation. And now that brings us into a lot of your work where we're talking about synthetic overlays, in other words, simulations within simulations. And one thing that really caught me, what you said, just recently, was the demiurge can only add to the simulation, they can't take away. And that's our great power. Maybe they can add a lot of BS in there to subterfuge and control people, but the truth is always there. And what we're all doing is exposing the truth, not just exposing the lies. And the original authentic simulation is always going to trump everything. It has more power, more juice behind it. So we're getting back in alignment with that. And, a great place to start is our topic of the day, which is this is a contrast between Gnostic Christianity and what has become known as Christianity by way of the Vatican, and why that contrast occurs, what that's all about. And then if we can maybe tie that up all at the end and maybe shed some light on the relevance of that within the simulation, and especially what we see going on in current events. So again, welcome. Thanks for making time with us, Jason. And so maybe if we could just start right in with the, with Luke, John, Mark, and the
Okay.
guys that were the alleged authors.
Okay. Thanks for the introduction, guys. Mike, you need to be my HR guy. You need that was pretty good, man. So, okay. First of all, I want to preface this by saying that any in-depth analysis of the historical record that exposes any belief system for being either fraudulent or highly manipulated is not an attack on the individuals who have fallen for the belief. And this is where a lot of people this is where they get their, they take offense, or they hit that wall of cognitive dissonance. These are the things that they have invested their faith in. These are the things that they believe. And when they're confronted with information that undermines that, and it makes sense to them, and they realize, oh, damn, I did just accept that at face value. There's no evidence for it whatsoever. When these people cross that threshold, they react in two ways. Some people get discombobulated for a spell, like I did, and then come back much stronger and hungrier for the truth. And now they become a truther. They become a researcher, and they no longer allow other people to dictate their beliefs. They now cherry pick the very things that they feel or know to be true, as opposed to just all the paradigms that are thrown at the collective. When it comes to analyzing Christianity, we deal with this a lot, because this is a soup made of all the best ingredients, and people have fallen for different aspects of Christianity, while they will freely admit that there are other parts of the religion that they don't resonate with. And this is the beauty about Christianity. It promotes so many different types of beliefs in it that it basically allows somebody who doesn't even believe that Jesus was crucified to still, in essence, refer to themselves as a Christian. Christianity is multifaceted, but the things that we distinguish today absolutely lose meaning. The differences between Presbyterians and Baptists, the difference between Lutherans and Methodists, and the difference between Mormons and Jehovah Witnesses. These things begin to melt away the more we scrutinize the original documents from which the Christian religion came from. It's all these little petty problems that different denominations have. They all vanish. They almost have no meaning the further back we go into analyzing the origin of these Christian texts. And one of the real problems is people believe that Christianity began with Christ, and it did not. Whether Jesus was real or not, whether he was actually Apollonius of Tyana, whether he was somebody who walked all the way from India and came, maybe he was a descendant of Osaka and the 30,000 Buddhist missionaries that were sent all over the world. One of the largest Buddhist chapters in world history was built in Antioch, and it was during the first century when Christianity developed. And the teaching method of the Buddhists was parables. So no matter what, if somebody believes in the historicity of an actual Jesus, or if it was a stage play that had been turned into a carnalized account of someone, a pseudo history, it doesn't matter. It is a soup of all the best ingredients. And this is very evident in the fact that the more one analyzes the early church fathers, the more the Didache, the Epistle of Barnabas, Clement of Rome, even Second Clement, the more we go into these. Now, none of these are in the Bible. You have to understand, these are not in the Bible. The Shepherd of Hermas, one of the oldest Christian documents surviving today. And it's all about the building of the Great Pyramid and divine beings that were, and each soul was a stone of man. The whole idea of the archaic concept is embodied right there in the Shepherd of Hermas, one of the oldest Christian documents. It's not in the Bible. Ignatius of Antioch, one of the very first church fathers. And yet, already we see a pattern when we study Ignatius, when we study Polycarp, when we study Dionysius and Papias and Quadratus of Athens, Aristides, Justin Martyr. Guys, there is a common denominator when you read all these. One, none of these are in the Bible. And two, church administration was already set in stone when these men released their works. These are the oldest Christian doctrines, and it's already set who the presbyters are, who the deacons are, who the pastors are, who the evangelists are. It's already set in stone. And they speak as if, in these texts, they speak as if this is a carryover from a much more ancient order, as if a new faith appeared and was put over a pre-existing system that was already well organized, a church-based system. So this is something I've never discussed on my own channel. Even my Dark Scriptures playlist, I don't really go into these details. I just go into the bibliographic citations of all these ancient authors who knew that this was a lie from the very beginning. And we don't have, like, Christian apologists are quick to point out that, hey, man, you don't have any first century authors that are claiming that this was all a lie. And that is evidence that it's all a lie, because this scenario of Christianity being born in the first century isn't true at all. Every text, every author of the first century churches is ex post facto. We have absolutely no references from the historical record that any of these texts were real or existed. They only became real after the Council of Nicaea. They only took on substance after the church ratified these as historical documents. Now, Christians are very quick to point out, well, these men lived right here. Polycarp, they lived in the first century. Clement lived in the first century. Everybody knows Ignatius was persecuted and he lived in the first century. Here is the problem. No historians will verify that, and there's no crossover with the secular histories. We have first century authors whose writings survive today. We have all of Seneca. There's so many of them. There's like 21 different authors in the first century, secular authors, and biblical scholars have even named these authors, and they don't. There's no crossover. Pliny the Elder, there is nothing to comport with this major earthquake and sun darkening that was supposed to happen. And we have two naturalists. One of them is Pliny the Elder, one of them is Seneca. They were naturalists. Their writings are preserved today. There's no mention of these events. And they would not have ignored them because they mentioned every other earthquake and every other eclipse. So this big Phoenix related one was a fiction, and it was a fiction written ex post facto. We have Melito of Sardis and I believe it's Minucius Felix. I never can get that name right. Minucius Felix. We have all these church invented writings that are introduced into the historical narrative ex post facto. It's just like I say on my channel all the time. Every calendrical system that we have measured the events of world history in was created after the fact. That's what ex post facto means. After the fact. Even the calendar we're on now is Anno Domini calendar. And initially, I thought it was just something simple like Sosigenes inventing a new calendar because the old calendar of the Julian was falling out of alignment. And this is the official story. And it made sense. I had no reason to look deeper. But it didn't make sense that it was 520 years after the alleged events that the calendar was supposed to be a countdown from, that this calendar was even created at all. Why not create a new calendar from the days of Sosigenes in 526, which would have been 526 AD? Why not just start a new calendar there? Instead, they backdated it over 5 centuries to when they thought Jesus was born. And they said it was 2 BC. Historians already know who was born in 2 BC. In the historical record, it was Apollonius of Tyana, a miracle worker, a man who spoke in secrets. Some believe it was a magician, but of high ethical and moral fabric, but he wasn't crucified, and the sun didn't darken, and there wasn't any of these weird mythological overtones and miracles that you find in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Matthew, Mark, and Luke seem to have been rewritten centuries after an older version of the story. And in 1910, 1911, 1912, this man published a book. His name is Charles Waite. The book is called The First 200 Years of the Christian Religion. In this book, this man exposes all the historical documents showing from the ancient world that Christianity was forged. It was deliberately created at the Council of Nicaea And it was a carnalized Christ that usurped the original Christian doctrine, because the original Christian doctrine did not require a blood sacrifice. It was spiritual. It was the Christianity of the gnosis. And the church then went to war against the Gnostics. One of the first ones they killed was Mani the Persian, and many others, because they needed to cover their tracks, because a lot of the eschatological material that was incorporated into the New Testament came straight out of the Zendavesta and different orders that had branched out from Iran. So we have these early writers like Irenaeus and Theophilus, and there's so many early church fathers. But the problem is the more you research the church fathers, they are all promoting a very fixed church hierarchy that we know could never have existed in the days of Jesus, because he was totally against that. He was totally, absolutely, in his own teachings, he was against putting all this together and formalizing, and it just wasn't the teachings of Jesus. So in order to bridge the gap between the sayings of Jesus, which are a part of the Gospel of Markion, which was before Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gospel of Markion was found in the possession of a Turkish navigator. He had the sayings of Jesus and 13 letters of Paul. Now, Paul is an abbreviated form of actually Apollonius. Markion had these texts. These were original Christian documents, but somebody had taken that original gospel, which had no miracles. It only had profound spiritual teachings and parables. And the Gospel of Markion starts with a strange man entering Samaria at 30 years old. And he was only there for 3 years. And he disappeared. He was not crucified. There was no sun darkening. There was no virgin birth, not a single miracle, water into wine. The original Christian story had none of these, but it was very spiritual material, and it was full of parables. And the only thing that there's crossover with between the actual synoptic gospels that were written in Rome and this gospel was that it was written by Samaritans who had a problem with the Jews. And this is why the Jews take the fall for, Pilate washes his hands and all in the synoptic gospels. This was basically the early Christian document, was essentially an anti-Semitic document. It was a document by a people who had grievances against the local Pharisees, Sadducees, the exilarchy, all the Jewish authorities. And these people feel they had been usurped and they had been excluded, when they also felt that they were of the ancient pedigree of Israel. And these people are basically the ones that made up the main body of the students of the Gnosis in the 1st century BC, and then all carried over into the 1st century AD. These are the very people who were in possession of over 1,000 ancient texts that showed the lie of the carnalized Christ, that the crucified God, the cult of the crucified God, is ancient, saying that he was born on December 25th, and all these elements came from the ancient pagan idolatry. These things the students of the Gnosis knew well, and the church had to spend the first 600 years of its existence eliminating everybody who believed these things, all these communities, and getting rid of all the documents. For those who have studied Roman church council history, you will find that there's over 200 councils. Those 200 councils, every time they convened, they omitted more and more texts. They just kept omitting more and more and more and more ancient writings and texts until they had what they wanted in 325 AD. And in 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea, they basically legitimized the version of events that we know of as the New Testament. And these 13 letters of Paul were necessary because these are the ones that basically give all the authority to Rome. Rome is the ultimate authority in the Christian hierarchy, in the Christian church. And the Gnostics and their descendants were absolutely completely against this idea. And this is why the Roman Catholic Church had to go to war with the Gnosis. And it lasted a long time. It lasted all the way to the 12th and 13th century AD, when Rome finally got fed up with the fact that these people were steadily producing more and more historical texts showing the lies that they had created. These people were the Albigensians and the Waldenses and the Cathars. And this genocide went through Europe, but principally in France, when the Roman Catholic Church sent its mercenary armors to butcher every man, woman, and child. They couldn't have that exposure. So they went in and burned all their libraries, all their books, and exterminated all these people. It's a real dark stain on humanity. But the resurgence of ancient writings that show the lie of Christianity is a constant theme throughout the historical record, and it fueled the church into doing book burnings. It fueled to destroy and burn libraries, and they really got a good handle on it during the burning times. This is when the legislation was created on the municipal level to back up the church when the church wanted to accuse somebody of heresy or witchcraft, and it allowed the church to go in. And most of the times it was students of the Gnosis that were being accused of the witchcraft. Had nothing to do with actual satanic rituals or none of that. Had everything to do with people being caught with literature or old books and all that basically gave a Gnostic point of view on the scriptures, which is that the gospel is spiritual and there's nothing carnal about it. So you want to talk about all these things? I mean, I'm sorry, I'm a little long-winded on my introduction to this video, but yeah, this is one thing I needed to point out is these early church fathers. When you study the early church father records, remember, none of these are in the Bible. None of these records are in the Bible, and hardly any of these men are ever mentioned. And yet, these are considered church fathers. However, their hierarchy, their church administrative laws and bylaws was all very, very well established, as if we have an organization that far predates Christianity, that all this was basically built on top of. They're way too organized and they're way too specific in the duties of different people. No new movement or new religion would have ever had that quickly, especially when the speaker and origin of the movement itself, Jesus, is totally against all of these ideas. So,
yeah, that's the most astounding thing is contemporary Christianity. You can't just make a blanket statement, but many Christians would be very offended by some of what we're discussing here, when in reality, we're just returning to the authentic spirit of Christianity. And it's also amazing that it's not obvious to everybody that this same tactic is going on today. And of course, religion itself, many people understand the word means to re-enlist. And when the Roman Empire was getting spread thin and needed to re-centralize its power, they found that commonality in all these different cultures and, from different times, and took little kernels of truth from each and then bastardized it under, one banner of supposedly Christianity as put forth by the Vatican. And what you're describing here sounds identical to the propaganda machine that exists to this day. So no, that wasn't long-winded at all. I think it's, if we could just keep going on that and just maybe embellish a bit as far as, and again, bringing it back to full relevance to today's times, and that these same forces are still at work.
Could I ask one thing, Jason?
Sure.
Because I've watched a lot of your presentations and they're phenomenal. And what I love about you is you're very keyed in on primary sources. Are we restricted in the first century to primarily Western primary sources and primarily Greek, Roman? Are there manuscripts from Persia, from Asia that we've been able to that you've referenced or exist, or from Egypt? I'm just curious because my mind always goes obviously to, how things, well, one, we know history is rewritten even back then. I'm wondering if things were covered up, burnt, lost with the Library of Alexandria, and maybe we should keep an open mind that possibly those historical records may be, burned or taken away from who that real figure was. And then I would love to go more into Paul, or Apollonius, right? If I always say the name wrong, but who I believe was Paul, or Paul. There are people who say historically Paul may not have existed at all, but it seems like there is a lot of historical record that he did, and who this character really was, because he's seen as sort of the founder of the church, right, along with Peter. And there's a lot of interesting stuff there that you talked about. So we can go in a lot of different directions, but I'm just curious in terms of primary sources. Do you believe there may be more discovered, that there's stuff that's been hidden, and that you keep an open mind to that possibility?
Well, yeah, I mean, in the Western world, we have Pliny the Younger, not Pliny the Elder. He died in Mount Vesuvius, 79 AD. The naturalist who had put together some phenomenal books that we still have today. But his nephew, or I don't believe it's his son, I believe it's his nephew. He's known as Pliny the Younger. He was alive during these times, and so were many other first century authors. And what we do not have are references to all these other authors that the church say existed. So in the church, in fomenting their deception, what they had to do is invent authors and writers and then cross-reference. And when they put out a new text like Polycarp or something, they would have Polycarp mention somebody else and just drop the name Claudius. Then another author would just drop the name Melito or Dionysius. Someone else would mention that Barnabas had a writing. It was very clever, and it's very easy to do. But where the lie is given up that all this was church, and this isn't just me saying this, even biblical scholars are convinced that many of these writings from the first century are all forgeries, and some of them, the forgeries, are so embarrassing that the Roman Catholic Church doesn't even try to defend them. Let me give you an example. Have you ever heard of the donation of Constantine?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I remember that. I remember that from Catholic.
Okay, in the donation of Constantine, a document was supposedly written by Constantine on his deathbed, giving the entire Roman Empire to the church. And this is the donation of Constantine. Now, the donation of Constantine didn't surface until 300 years after the death of Constantine, which is very, very peculiar. However, they produced this document when they were at their ascendancy, when the Roman church was at their ascendancy, and they were basically bullying the monarchies of Europe. This is when they decided to pull this stunt. And they used the donation of Constantine to usurp even more power, and it worked. The problem was a really penetrating mind just shortly after was studying the donation of Constantine and exposed the whole thing, because the donation of Constantine wasn't even it was supposed to have been written in and been an original document in the 4th century AD. The problem with that is that the donation of Constantine quoted all Latin Vulgate verses, and the Latin Vulgate had not been invented yet. So this is just one example of the anachronisms that have been employed over and over and over. Writings have been found, and it's been obvious that syntactical errors from the 11th, 12th, and 13th century were introduced into texts that would have never had those errors if those texts were really written in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries. Latin has changed fundamentally over time, and those changes are found in these texts, but they would have never been in the original text. And this is why many historians know, like the testimony of Pontius Pilate before the Senate, and Pontius Pilate, the Gospel of Pilate. All these are forged records, are absolutely untrue. All the mentioning of Dionysius, the Areopagite, and how the creator was destroying the world when his son was hanging on the cross, and all these were fictions. And then other writers like Augustine would try to quote all these historic writers as men. He tried to list a whole bunch of historic writers that all mentioned the earthquake and the sun darkening and all that. The problem was Augustine lived 400 years after the events he wrote about. He's quoting a whole bunch of authors, but we have lists from authors that were living in the 1st century who provided all these authors' names that were from the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries BC. There's no crossover. It's all made up and invented. Yeah, these are people today automatically assume that people 2,000 years ago were gullible and stupid, and they were not. They were documenting everything, and they were making sure that many of their records could be preserved in transmissions without too much redactions and manipulation, because they would refer to other writers where the same information was preserved. Well, the church borrowed this practice, but where they really effed up was that every historical author they mentioned doesn't exist. They just made them all up. And then the church claims that because due to antiquity and age, none of those writings are preserved. We don't have them anymore. But, however, the Lord has seen fit to make sure that the holy writings of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John have remained preserved to us to this day. This is the duplicity of the church. And it's really astonishing when you find when you see this. Once you begin to see it, you can't unsee it. Document after document after document after document gives all the appearances of what they actually are. 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th century monk compositions that are just totally made up to support earlier church documents, which were also forgeries.
How much have more recent discoveries, such as Dead Sea Scrolls and the understanding of the Essenes, how much has that contributed to just revealing some of this?
It doesn't contribute at all, as far as positively. It is very damning. It's very damning that the Dead Sea Scrolls from 1947 and the Egyptian Gnostic Nag Hammadi Library from 1948, in either series of collections of writings, mention any events that are in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Yes, these two libraries from the ancient world totally avoid all of this as if it never happened.
So we're talking like the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Judas, the Lost Gospels too, right? They tend to show the Jesus character as much more of a mystic and less of like the traditional Son of God, which is interesting. And there's also like a conspiracy. I forget which one it is. That's a CIA creation, because it was right around the time when the CIA sort of came. So we can get lost in all that. I have a question though. There is a well-known historian at the time, the 1st century AD, who was Jewish, who worked for the Romans. There was Flavius Josephus, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned him a lot. And he makes no mention, right, of as well of any of the supposed apostles who were.
Listen, as much as detail specific as Flavius Josephus was about all the events leading up to the 1st century and during the 1st century, there is no way he would have ignored so profound a story as a stranger showing up and overthrowing the money market at the temple. He would have never omitted that. He would have never omitted this stranger coming up into the temple and teaching, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees being bewildered. He would have never omitted that data at all. What we do have in Josephus is an unbroken history of all these events involving the Jews and the Romans, and Jesus isn't in any of that. And what we do have is an interpolation, and even biblical scholars admit that it's a blatant forgery, that later copies of Josephus aren't the same as the earlier copies. Later copies mention that there was a new belief system in something called the Christus, which you can interpret that as Christ or Christianity. But the truth of the matter is that that's an interpolation that was added later on, and it probably refers to the Hare Krishnas that were invading in the 1st century AD. A lot of people don't know that this is the 1st century AD. The Emperor Osaka in India had basically unleashed Buddhist missionaries all over the ancient world, and for about 250 years these missionaries had built churches everywhere, and Antioch was one of the largest Buddhist safe havens in the Mediterranean world, and it just so happens to be also claimed by the Christian records to be the birthplace of Christianity. So I bring up Josephus too. I did bring this up before that we went live about Ralph Ellis, and you said you do have his books, and there's a lot of people in our community that have brought him up to me. So I bring him up here, and I know you haven't read his books, but I did preface this before we go live because he does have a fascinating theory through Josephus's writings that there was a Jesus,
and it's coming from the Parthians, which really originate from the Scythians, which are a fascinating people that are kind of been wiped out from history. I know when I was a history major at the University of California, UC system, and I was never told about the Scythians, and they were a huge empire at this time. That were sort of very Greek and Persian coming over, and there was the king at that time was King Esus, who would translate to Jesus, who led the Jewish revolt against the Romans, and had literally had a crown of thorns, wore a purple robe, and was crucified. So it's a very interesting thing. And that was in the 60s, when around the time, AD 60s, when supposedly the Q Codec, right, was written. So there are a lot of interesting parallels about a real historic figure there. And there is even the, oh gosh, I had it in my notes somewhere. I don't usually do any research before our chats because I knew you were coming on. I did the Palmyra triad carving of that first century that shows the king, this king, and he looks just like Jesus, long hair, the same crown, everything. So really interesting. And maybe the Romans are just from taking all this stuff, smashing it all together and making this, this whole narrative around it to, a couple hundred years later to create this mythos.
Well, what you're describing to me, the Scythians, listen, this was the great people known by all the other civilizations as the Saka. This is Saka. The Saka families of the steppes, from which like the Russian Cossacks derive from, the ancient Sumerians, not Sumerians, but the Cimmerians, the Cimmer, the people of Gemiri, Gomorrah. These are the progenitors of Celts, the Gauls. Yeah, this is a huge branch of people, the Saka, and then also that's, sorry to interrupt, Jason, but the Celts, and of course, is where we get the Druidic faith, which many believe was the original Christians. Yes, we have the largest stronghold for early Christianity in the world is not the Middle East. A lot of people don't know this. It was not the Middle East. It was not even anywhere in the Mediterranean. But the earliest and most prolific stronghold for early Christianity is the Britannic Isles. It took off there before it took off anywhere else. But anyway, the Saka started a new calendar in 76 AD. In our 76 AD, it started the new Saka calendar. And to have a figure with a crown of thorns and long hair, that's not a departure from anything normal at that time. The crown of thorns is an interesting deal, and that's probably where the early church got their idea to put it. But taking some historical details from Apollonius of Tyana and then merging them then with a Saka king, who are a throne, all these elements. This is how the greatest fictions are perpetuated, because they will always have an admixture of facts to muddy the waters. So I'm on board 100% with the story of Jesus being an amalgamation of all the best parts. But I am convinced by virtue of my own studies, and I like to quote like Kersey Graves, the 16 crucified saviors before Christ. I love to quote Akaria S. This woman translates many different languages. She devoted her entire life to study and all that, and she published a book. Akaria S. published a book called The Greatest Story Ever Sold, and it is absolutely packed with historical citations showing you exactly how they invented the Christian religion and how it took 300 years for them to do it, and how it took them 1,000 years to basically do away with all naysayers to the point where it became acceptable. But these two books are fantastic. And there's more. Don't get me wrong, there's more than that. In my library, I have a whole bunch of them, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. And the problem with discussing these matters is like you just mentioned, is just people become triggered because they think they take it as a personal attack when it's not. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change my opinion of somebody if I find out they have fallen for a paradigm that was very cleverly put out for them to fall for. So uh, it's just where I become opinionated toward people is, one, if you don't want to look at the facts and make up your own opinion instead of just being told what the truth is, and two, if you see enough facts and you still cling to error, then I'm just gonna have to let you go. You're somebody I just can't be around. But it's but as far as source materials and these parent sources and all that, you asked about India and Tibet and all, we do have traditions. I don't know what they are. I have read the material, but there are Tibetan stories of a holy man that left the East and went to the West. And in those stories, he came back. And when he came back, he had told these stories of what he experienced in the Middle East. And when he came back, he started the I think it's called the Nestorian Church. It's just the opposite of what we've been told in the West. But in the West, it was in the Western traditions, it was a stranger that entered into the Jewish community and rocked the boat. In the Gnostic versions and in the Samaritan version, it was a Samaritan. It was someone who lived in the Greek Decapolis. The 10 Greek cities of northern, it's the exact location of ancient Israel. I'm not talking about the Jews. I'm not talking about Judea. I'm talking about ancient Israel was located right there in northern Palestine. These people were all deported in 745 to 721 BC, and they disappeared. And they became many peoples. And the migration routes, the who they became is a subject matter for another video. But this is the lost 10 tribes of Israel. And even Jewish scholars today have written, and I've quoted them in my materials, Jewish scholars today have even quoted that the 10 tribes of Israel are here. They are living among us today. They're spread abroad, across the face of the world right now, well, which was prophesied for them to do. They would do it through captivity. And this one people that you're referring to, the branch of the Saka people, are descended from these people. And so we have these Eastern traditions that tell the same story, but from an Eastern perspective. So it seems that Christianity is a descendant of both Buddhism and maybe Neoplatonism that was washed in with a lot of the gnosis. Listen, they couldn't ignore the gnosis. And the reason they couldn't was because the fourth gospel is a Gnostic document. It's not like Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There are almost no crossover between Matthew, Mark, and Luke and the fourth gospel, which is the Gospel of John. As a matter of fact, biblical scholars have identified a whole list of variances and differences between John's depiction of events and the events of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which all come from two sources. There was an original source, the Q document, the Quell document. This was the original source, and there were the sayings of Jesus. This original document and the sayings of Jesus were put together to produce the book of Mark. Then the book of Mark was used to write Matthew, again, referring back to this Q document. Then Luke was put together using all the prior documents and some creative license. So it's but John's unlike any of them. John has whole passages that read like they're straight out of the Nag Hammadi literature. John's concepts are fundamentally different. John is a very different gospel, and for good reason. The church did incorporate the teachings of the Gnosis, but they wouldn't incorporate a lot, and they ended up having to go to war with those people because they still had access to materials that showed the whole lie and how it was created.
Now, who is John actually? Because apparently it's not who we've been led to believe either. So what's his personage?
Oh, there's no. Yeah, Dr. Barry, we need to clear the air on that. It needs to be understood that the Gospels were written far after the events they depict. There is no evidence. There is no evidence from any of the church fathers that the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John existed within the lifetime of the apostles. So whoever wrote Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, these were written by people after Jesus and the apostles were gone. These are not firsthand deals. These weren't even passed down. These were all, like I said, these were all written from a single source, the Q document. You know, I know you guys understand Q. The Q document is quell for source material, unknown source material. Scholars agree that it's an unknown source, but the sayings of Marcion and the 13 letters of Paul, now these were a part of Marcion's collection. And you should get into the writings of Charles Waite from over 100 years ago in the first 200 years of the Christian religion, and the books that he cites to understand how this Gospel of Marcion was used to create the synoptic Gospels that we have today. Like I said, that gospel does not have any of the miraculous. It doesn't have any of the supernatural. It is a holy man on a holy mission, basically revealing holy things. And that's all it is. So,
and it starts with that, for of course, the famous beginning of that with the word. Beginning was the word, which is about as much logos as you're going to get in a document.
Yeah, no doubt. There's no doubt. Yeah, the people like to cite the church fathers like Tertullian. You know, they like to cite Clement. They like to cite, Origen, and people just don't realize when you these writings of the Augustine of Hippo, when you read these writings, they are so riddled with forgeries and errors, extrapolated texts that have been taken from other sources. They were the church's attempt early on to give historicity to the Jesus narrative. And that's how they read. They read exactly like that. And even biblical scholars can't take most of the early church deals. I mean, if you were, here's a really good example. If you were to spend a year studying just the extra canonical, the pseudepigraphical and apocryphal texts, it's a lot of them. If you were to go through all these and read those, what you're going to read is a fundamentally different type of Christianity than what you'll find in the New Testament writings. And this is because these writings, these things were all just attempts to throw so many details out there just to get different populations to agree to a certain series of facts, which was published on the side, which we now have today as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So, and then the original story, this Greek stage play, was turned into this huge passion event that was supposed to have actually happened. And in order to give that life, we have the 13 letters of Paul added to the New Testament. And here is where a real problem begins, not for the believer, because somebody who already believes or wants to believe Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, then there's not going to be anything in the 13 letters of Paul that's going to give them cause to doubt. But for somebody who is thinking clearly outside of anything dogmatic, outside of any programming, somebody who just wants the core facts, you're not going to be able to set it aside that whoever wrote the 13 letters of Paul had never read Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Not one single quote from Jesus can be found in the letters of Paul. Paul doesn't mention any miracles done by Jesus, and you would think he would use those to his advantage to convince people of the divinity of Christ. Paul doesn't mention a virgin birth. Paul doesn't mention almost anything at all supernatural about Jesus's doings. To Paul, Christianity was not about Jesus. It was about Christ and him crucified and the daily crucifixion that your soul needs to go through in its ongoing purge for whatever reasons. It's a really weird sensation that comes over you when you start reading the 13 letters of Paul and you try to associate what you're reading with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because there's a gulf between them. If they're not, whoever wrote Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John had nothing to do with writing the 13 letters of Paul. And whoever wrote the 13 letters of Paul had never known the existence of the books Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These gospels were unknown to this individual. And that's
Well,
a
the
problem.
earliest Christians, it was about understanding and embodying spirit. And of course, what the Vatican did was to bring us into a lot of mental details to divide everybody along those lines and to confuse. And it's the same exact tactic used today with what people consider science, rather than understanding the design of our entire realm, how it functions, and as above, so below, how we are each in our bodies representations of that larger function. We're all arguing about, how things, really cause this or that, and just, one big subterfuge. So it's the same old game. So there's another gentleman you introduced. What was his name? Theodora, about 430 AD. And what was his role as far as covering up some of the early authentic teachings, to make way for the four gospels?
Well, these were all these church writers. They're agents of Rome. They are, just like the person that the Sosigenes who invented the AD calendar. The AD calendar was designed to hide the Phoenix timeline, the Phoenix calendar. I have a video showing that, because it blew my mind when I discovered these details from an old book where the church admits that they knew of a 552-year cycle and they needed the public not to know about it. And that the 552-year cycle, which is a Phoenix cycle, it's 138 times 4, that it had completely destroyed the world. It's called the Justinian plague period, when Emperor Justinian and Theodora were ruling Byzantine and the Eastern Orthodox Roman Empire. So we had this series of destructions that started in 522 with the appearance of Phoenix, and they carried out 25 years. Semi vapor canopy form. There was no sun for a long period of time. There was plagues, volcanic activity. There's all kinds of things. Worldwide cooling had happened, and the vapor canopy vanished 25 years later. And all this is very well documented. And the church tried to cover it up by inventing a new calendar. Well, it's not the first time the church used the Phoenix to their advantage. They did it when they wrote ex post facto these gospels, included an event where the sun turned dark for a long period of time, not an eclipse. 3 hours is not an eclipse. So the sun turned dark and there's a massive earthquake. Okay, this is Phoenix phenomenon material, and the records of the ancient world that all discuss this and the Phoenix were well known, even better at that time than they are today. It's taken a lot for me to be able to amass all the data I have on the Phoenix, but I can only imagine how much more it would have meant to those people back then to learn that, oh my God, he must have been Jesus. He must have been the Son of God. If there was an earthquake at the same time the sun goes out, because we know from our own histories, every time that happened, a great man either died or was born. This is the Phoenix history. So this is it starts with one of the greatest personalities of the ancient world, Enoch. So by attaching the sun darkening and earthquake deal, it allowed early Christian writers to identify this phenomenon as being caused by the Phoenix. This is in early Christian writings. They actually say this in the early writings, that they're trying to get the people to associate Jesus's crucifixion with the Phoenix. The problem is all the naturalists of the day never mentioned the sun darkening or the earthquake. It didn't happen at least at that time, anywhere near that time. The last time earthquakes had afflicted the Mediterranean was in 31 BC, which was a true Phoenix year. It's on the 138-year periodicity. But 33 AD is not on the Phoenix timeline. And there are Seneca, Pliny the Younger, Pliny the Elder, neither did Josephus ever record, neither did Philo Judaicus. None of these men, Tatian, there's so many, none of these men, Tertullian was alive. None of these men, so was Tacitus. None of them mentioned the earthquake in the deal. It didn't happen. It was invented by the church, and the church wanted the people to associate Jesus with the phoenix. But all this was written 3 centuries ex post facto after the events. And this is why the early Christian writers didn't know hardly any of these details, because the whole story and all the miracles hadn't even been invented yet. Yeah, a lot of the early church fathers don't know anything about the miracles of Jesus. These were introduced later. This is why Paul never mentioned miracles of Jesus, never mentioned miracles, never mentioned the sun darkening, never mentioned the earthquake, turning water into wine. Paul never mentioned any of these things. They were unknown to them because the church didn't invent them till later.
So how do we tie all this back up to present time here and what's going, and we're, with our first few talks, we're talking about the demiurge and the overlay simulation. So where do we stand today, and what do you see transpiring?
Well, Christianity as a control system isn't really necessary, like it has been for the past 15 centuries. It's just there's so many different control systems that are more effective now. It's the only way I can see it's still going to be exploited. It's not going to be exploited by the church now. It's not going to be exploited by Rome. I believe that this strong Christian programming is about to be exploited by our own governments, and that the next major conflict, which has already been planned and it's already been written about in the 1880s and widely published, and people just forgot. They just don't realize, man, that World War I unfolded precisely as it was written to unfold. And so did World War II. World War II resulted in the exact same thing that was predicted in the 1880s it would do, because it was an agenda. World War III was also written about in the 1800s, and it's going to happen the exact same way. There is going to be a last days World War III crusade of the Western powers all fighting the Middle East. It is going to be a war of Christianity against Islam, and it's probably going to be set off as soon as Israeli Mossad or some other group comes in and does something to the Dome of the Rock in order to basically drop the first domino. But all this is in the planning. Yeah. And I believe the United States of America is going to spearhead the next crusade in different European countries that are absolutely fed up with the Muslim migration problems that they're having in all these countries, which is intentional and financed by the very people who want World War III. So this is where I believe that this narrative of Christianity is dangerous, because people who believe that they are allied to God will follow you anywhere if you're going to fight God's battles, and that's dangerous.
Yeah, the tactic seems apparent that, you push the pendulum in one direction, and we've gone so far left, to the extreme that now you get the backlash, and now the Christians will actually, and I use that term loosely, but will actually be used to, go to the other extreme and do exactly what you're saying and be used by the far right. And
it's called being groomed.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say, though, that there, I know what you're referencing too, right? In terms of the First and Second War documents in the 1800s, are you referencing the Masonic leader? We talked about him, I think, on the last.
Yeah. Well, there's a guy named Mazzulli. His name, I can't remember Mazzulli. He's an Italian.
He was Italian mafia dude.
Yeah, he's Italian mafia dude. In fact, the acronym mafia comes from his name. Yep. And it comes from his ideology, which was to burn, kill, deceive, all that stuff like that. It's in Italian, the acronym. But he and Albert Pike had a dialogue where they outlined all 3 world wars, and when the first two have unfolded precisely as planned. So I'm pretty sure that the third one will too.
I will say this though, Jason, there weren't errants apparent as there are now. I believe that if we take into consideration how the simulation is a construct from both individual consciousness and the reality tunnel set forth there, and then the collective consciousness, we do, I believe, have the ability to reshape it, especially if there is a benefactor coming down again, or is involved more and more so, whether that be a certain, I don't know, high profile figure or not. Are certainly ones popping up left and right now. Some would say maybe that's RFK Jr. Some would say he's a total controlled op. I don't know. But what's his message? His message is, the typical message you get from the outsider coming in, trying to take on the presidency, bring all the troops home. War is not the answer. We got to get out of the Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. So it is interesting. Like, I'm a half glass full kind of guy. Like, I do see that there is an awakening happening right now. People are waking up to all of this nonsense and don't want to be a part of it anymore. People are opting out, and people are quite frankly exhausted by it all. I said this on a recent AlphaCast. People just want to start a farm, plant food, get away from it all, are tired of the cultural nonsense, tired of the dialectic, tired of what the news is saying, and just want to be left alone and get back to being real, living men and women again. In your community, you're seeing explosion in your growth, right? Like, would you be open to that the errants can change the coding, right, of the simulation, and can affect that, what Albert Pike and what I call these black magicians are trying to create, because they understand how the rules work, and they're trying to force feed the simulation according to their agenda. And now it seems like we've got a lot more people awake to it.
I would like to believe that. I will be honest that I'm critical. And the reason I'm critical is because the dynamic operative that I have perceived is that you and I and Barry, our communities can merge. We can merge with other truther communities. We can all, and I believe that we can change our world. But the world is on a fixed program. And that's why I'm critical. I do believe 100% what you're saying as applied to all of those who are actively doing that. But as far as the overworld that we're experiencing, I believe that the collective will still suffer the designs of the elite because they're not participating.
As we go back to Jesus, one quote, I'll let you speak. Fair one. As we go back to the Nazarene, Jesus, be of, what is it now? Be of the world, not in it. Now I'm going to misquote it, but that point is right. Is like being your own master and not being so in tune with all the narrative around you and controlling your own reality. And I think that's what the Gnostics were really all about. Go ahead, Bear. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that a lot of the teachings of the mystics have always referred to this time as for those who will be left. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if many people succumb, but isn't it really a matter of choice? And as you said, Jason, they can only add to the simulation. They can't really take away. So I still believe the original design was truth. And if you just define truth, it's basically light. And, so I guess maybe a question in that is this artificial edifice that's, maybe an overlay, whatever you want to call it, a simulation of its own. Is it serving a useful purpose to allow people to make that choice? And as I've heard you even say, which I kind of believe, that the folks that are making the choice to not fall for the fear will just simply vanish someday from this synthetic overlay. And that, however, others will be trapped, within the simulation.
Listen, I have a very good answer for this. And my answer is literally quoting the New Testament itself. So I understand there's a dichotomy here. It's also oxymoronic that I would sit here and criticize the provenance of the New Testament writings and yet still rely on it as an authority. Does this seem like a paradox to you?
I would say no, because the perennial philosophy still is interjected within it. Our good friend Marty Leeds has been fundamental in explaining to us how the gnosis is still in those books, right? You have the parables, you have a lot of the mathematical mysticism in it, connected to the sky clock.
Okay, well,
and the
let me
heavenly
continue
bodies.
then.
Yeah.
Then let me continue to answer Barry's question. So I'm going to tell you with the same mouth that by erudition and long study and deep delving, back when I was a Christian, I really, really wanted to believe this story because I had believed it for many years of my life. And now that I've done all this research and I've isolated all these particulars, I can lay them all out. And now I understand how it was done. But what I can't get past, what I still can't get past, is the original Gospel of Markion is so spiritual. There's nothing supernatural in it. There's no miracles, but it is so spiritual. It's just the teachings of Jesus and then his parables. I am on board with the fact that this story is divine, that this role is divine, and that we are to pattern our lives off of these teachings, whether it happened historically or not. But he asked me about bridging this concept of Christianity, whether it's real or not, with the simulation. And the most genius approach to that is straight out of the New Testament. I believe that we are immortal beings just passing through, just like the parables say. We're the prodigal son. We're the sojourner. We're the traveler. We're the good Samaritan that helps the traveler. Listen, all these parables are telling the story. But when asked about ruling and being king, Jesus told the truth. And here's where the simulation lies. We're in a construct, and Jesus recognized that because they wanted him to take on his mantle. They wanted him to lead. They wanted him to be king. They wanted him to take on the very authority that they knew he had by the way he spoke. But he answered, my kingdom is not of this world. And this tells me that I'm in an artificial construct and that there's something better waiting for me. And he was just here temporarily to let me know, hey, man, there's a shred of hope, but you're in an evil construct, predator versus prey ecosphere right now, made by the God of this world, not made by the God of the universe. So the very answer, my kingdom is not of this world, tells me there's something better, where those precepts and those ideologies and those teachings that he provides actually have substance, because they really don't here. Everything is just the opposite as it should be inside this construct. But my kingdom is not of this world tells me that we who follow that mindset and that type of spirituality are not of this world either.
We have a little bit more of a extra advantage now also because more recent luminaries have come forth and really explained the physics behind this construct that the contemporary Western mind can more grasp. You know, we started with people like Steiner that, you know, explained in certain ways. And you have folks like Walter Russell that really got behind, you know, the electrical construct and that we are all sons and co-creators. And that, you know, again, it really explains exactly how everything, you know, that you talk about is 100% true, but takes it a little bit out of the mystical realm and boils it down to pure physics.
Yeah, I'm don't get me wrong. I've read a lot of that material myself. The physics material is what blows your mind. Like Paul LaViolette, his books just shocked me, especially Subquantum Kinetics. I couldn't put that book down. For a long time, I was trying to wrap my head around what subquantum. How is this possible? Subquantum Kinetics basically bridges all these abstract ideas and concepts in physics that are not really they don't have any crossover. They're just different theories for different ideas, and Subquantum Kinetics bridge them all together. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. How can our world even be physical? It's got to be a mental construct for all these things to be true. And hey, he's not the only one. It's just it becomes apparent just the more and more we just cogitate on the world that we've been told, we just find over and over it's not the world that we live in at all. And all these scientific explanations for all these things are just they're things that are taken on faith. It's just, it boggles my mind sometimes that people can still consider themselves a free thinking individual when they're still accepting things such as I descended from a monkey, or that anybody today there's nobody alive today who was alive in the 1800s. No one. And yet, with absolute authority, you're going to look me in the eye and tell me that this creature found in this rock died 65 million years ago. I'm so beyond all that. Every bit of it is faith. Everybody who considers themselves scientific is just a religionist masked in a different package. Because in order to follow any science today, you have to have faith that you're being told the truth. You have to have faith that NASA's CGI images that they give you all the time, and they admit in the images, this is CGI rendering of the telemetry and all the data that we received through this telescope. When are telescopes not taking pictures? Telescopes are now producing mathematical constructs that are rendered into CGI images that NASA publishes. Hey, man, this is what this object looks like. Okay, you have to take it on faith that any one of those series of hundreds of variables are accurate in order for you to see that image and say that's the truth. All science is like that. We have to take things on faith that gravity is real. We have to take things on faith that the world is a globe going 63,000 miles around through space, hurling around a star that is 93 million miles away, and that 6 months later we're going to be exactly 187 million miles away from where we were when all the atomic clocks show that the Earth is not moving at all. We're absolutely static. I mean, every single thing that we learn today is basically taken on faith, because science is supposed to be about direct observation and analysis, but that's not what's happening. It never has been. Every bit of the scientific model is also demonstrations of faith. Because in order to produce a new theory, it's always based on set perimeters that have been established in the past, and they're all just taken on faith. So this is why I don't criticize my Christian brothers and sisters. I'm one of them. I just don't believe it literally happened. But to me, spiritually, it doesn't matter. But the difference, people really want to lean on, well, I'm a Christian, man, I know this is right and this is wrong. And yet you criticize the scientists when both of you are exercising your discretion to believe things you have not observed, nor can you prove. So from the scientific perspective and from the religious perspective, they're both equally guilty. It's faith. You've accepted these things to be true. You don't know them to be true.
And that's why we call it scientism. And it's also, the proof is just like during the Roman times, the great works in true science, starting back from the early alchemists all the way up to people like Walter Russell, they never find their works in universities. When I was going through all my medical training, it was all the scientism. And, if we're taught the true science, then we would appreciate the Hermetic concepts of know yourself and you'll know the universe, because it's one functional realm. We're all microcosms of the same thing. And also it prevents us from escaping or making our final exodus from the simulation in the first place. So, so here we are, full circle, but the cat's out of the bag, and I'm an optimist. I do believe a lot of people are going to decide to go down with the ship, and that's, none of my business. It's, who are we to think that we know what experience somebody else needs? But that's why it's just so important, the work that you're doing to just draw on all these rich, sources from the past and connect the dots, and then to just shine the light on all the propaganda that began way back then with, the Catholicism and the Vatican, and how the same exact thing's going on today. So, Jason, this has been great. Any final comments or things that you'd like to tie up with here, or anything we didn't talk about that you think are important?
Oh, no, it was pretty good discussion. It's like I said, if there's people that want to do their own research and they want to, there's a numerous sources that I cite. I mean, you guys know that in the past week, I released 2 Dark Scriptures videos, which are montages on my own channel. I took my entire Dark Scriptures playlist and I abbreviated it down to 2 videos. So each video has like 12 videos all edited and compressed in there into 2-hour presentations, so you can get the full gamut. I've been doing that with all my playlists. Like the Phoenix, I had 82 Phoenix videos, and people don't want to go through all that. So I edited all 82 videos down, removing intros, outros, extraneous information, rants, tirades, whatever, everything just to the core data. And I abbreviated it to 7 2-hour long videos. So for those who are really interested in this topic, I would go listen to my 2 videos that I just released this week because I discuss all these topics and more. The only thing I didn't discuss in those older videos is what I told you guys. This is the very first time I've talked about all these early church writings. One of the common denominators is how organized they were already in their hierarchy, in their deaconships and their clergy, showing that these references by early church writers are direct evidence of either one or two possibilities. One is that they're forgeries that were written centuries later, and this is why they had all this church hierarchy down pat already. Or two, they're writing real stuff, which is a problem because none of it comports with the New Testament, but they're writing real stuff, but they're writing it in the first century like it's alleged. However, there's a church hierarchy already well established, like centuries established. That's a problem too. So either way, we have a serious issue here.
Yeah. And I think that also the great takeaway, though, is that they are spiritual texts through and through. And there is as you said, a divine sort of thorough put or a message coming out of that we can still take. And if Christians could focus more on that and less on the sort of salvation, the savior, the original sin, a lot of stuff I believe was interjected in for a control system versus, something like when I read the Gospel of Thomas, which I really enjoy, there is just a sort of a more of a concept of the I am and of us all embracing the inner kingdom of God. And those concepts, which are, I believe, going to lead to a post-religion epoch. Some would call, I did want to bring this up real quick, because I don't know if we touched on this a little bit, but the Yuga cycles, and I know your history and your calendar breakdowns sort of don't go back, hundreds of thousands of years, right? You go back to what the actual texts can provide us. And so many say that I believe it's like the Kali Yuga, which is like the Iron Age. It's the age we've been going through of the predator-prey class is coming to an end in 2025. We'll have 300 years of transition, and then we'll be going into the ascending Dwapara Yuga cycle, which is like the golden age. Could it be that your breakdowns and everything that you found is just been the Kali Yuga, and that this Phoenix event will initiate us into this golden age, and that we just have the physical breakdowns and destruction is just that? It's just like the cleansing as we move into that sort of spiritual, more enlightened, ascending age.
Well, the narrative that you just told me about this Vedic chronology or whatever sounds very similar to what I promote, which is the apocalypse is going to give way. There will be a reset of the system, but when the system resets, you already know those who are awakened, those who are spiritual, those who are ready to make their exodus, they depart this construct and go to another. They go somewhere else. But those who are still in love with the world, with those who have embraced the world, those who have signed the contract, those who are not ready, they get recycled back. But the recycling goes all the way back to the beginning of this program. This Similacrum program begins in a golden age, and then history all begins again. Then it begins to turn into a Kali Yuga age. Then there's a great cataclysm, and all this to me is a historical program that plays over and over and over and over with just like Alan Vaughn said, history repeats itself, but with variations. It's the same thing. The AI system running this whole simulacrum this time has learned many things, and it can change on the next one. But yeah, I agree with that chronology. I just see it a different way. I see it as a system reboot. Everybody goes back to the beginning.
Another valuable source is, Rudolf Steiner explains the larger evolutionary cycles going back thousands of years, since humanity's inception here. by way of the sky clock and the precession of the constellations, and how each larger epoch stimulates these different events and historical cycles that have brought humanity to this point. It really parallels, a lot of what you're talking about, Mike, but I like it because it also brings in more from an alchemical, astrological, not a shallow astrological interpretation, but the true larger sky clock, and also makes it more acceptable for the Western mind.
Love it. Hey guys, this has been
For what
such a
it's worth.
Yeah, been such a great conversation. Really appreciate both of you. The chat has been on fire and been very positive. And the takeaway I always get from your stuff, Jason, is we are empowered to be control of our own journey here. We have our own, as you say, our own reality tunnel, right? That we are directing. And what's exciting about that is it gets us away from the victim mentality that I think a lot of people, when they first hear simulation and they first hear this Gnostic mentality, they go right to the pop Gnostic stuff and the demiurge controlling us and we're all victims. But really, that is not your message, right? I'd love for you to just end on this, because that's one of the bigger things we get. Oh, you're bringing on Jason from Archaics. We're all in the simulation. We're all screwed. We have no control over our lives. And that's not your message at all.
Well, they're getting that from my trolls. My trolls are try to control my narrative all the time. They don't get that from my channel. I don't get a lot of detractors that actually go to my channel and listen. I get most of my detractors are the ones that follow troll channels. So they get triggered when they hear I'm coming on with somebody's group or something, but that's fine. That's to be expected. This is a war, and I don't mind being a participant. So it's but my message is that we're living in two different realities at the same time, and that the victim mentality is a part of the constructive. It's dungeon programming, and people very easily fall into this rut in their lives, and they begin to live the victim. They begin to act like it, and they modify their own behavior to comport with a victim status, whether they know it or not. Most of it's unconscious. This feedback loop is created, and the construct incessantly feeds more experiences into your life to justify your belief that you're a victim. My message is that the awakened individual, this highly individualized soul, is existing in a totally different reality, can create its own insular reality and modify the conditions of its existence, because this is a field. It's only perceived as a world. And when you start understanding that you have the power for field construction, you can introduce feedback loops that will bring you the very circumstances that you want to experience. It's just the opposite of dungeon programming, but this requires you to be the architect and for you to allow the construct to build for you. The rest of the world are chasing carrots. They think they have to build all the things to bring these things into their reality, and this is where these psychoses set in. This is where all this depression sits in. People move and work and they expend all this energy, but the very act of really desperately trying to accomplish something only pushes it away. So yeah, that's my message. We are co-creators. We are co-creators. And if you're not going to embrace the fact that you're in a relationship with reality, then reality is going to create conditions for you to make sure you don't never come to that conclusion.
That was very well said, Jason. Thank you. And that's the way I hoped we'd kind of come back full circle to that point today. So perfect. And thanks again for being with us.
Awesome. Love you guys.
Hey, Jason. Love you, man.
Love you,
go support Jason, archaics.com. That's ARCHAIX.com. And also archaics.tv for his content that's not on LooshTube. because you never know when it all goes away on that platform. So,
well, hey, it's there's two reasons for that. One of them, I got a lot of videos on there, and I've got contributors like you guys aren't on there, but I got other channels that have had videos deleted, and shoot, they're coming to archaics.tv and putting their stuff up there. I'm free to talk about what I want to. I got people on there on my Healing Underground section. I got people that are really into homeopathic stuff you can't talk about. The pharmaceutical companies will attack you. So I got a lot of good things happening on archaics.tv. It's awesome, but it is also a backup, because I'm telling you now, the day YouTube cancels my channel, if that ever happens, I will, the next day I'm going to have hundreds of videos uploaded to archaics.tv. So it's a backup, and in this world, it's necessary evil.
yeah, and I will say your community has been very supportive of Cordal. I very much appreciate that. Thanks to Sol Luckman bringing that up. And, Cordal now has the ability to host all of those videos on the QDN network that's distributed across the world. So you're not reliant upon a centralized server or your hard drives there at your house. So God forbid, if there's a fire or any damage physically in that area that takes your server down, it doesn't matter, because it's redundantly shared across millions of computers all over the world. So, and that's fully decentralized, and it's, fully run by the people for the people, open source and all that. So I know people already have put up the Archaic site, I believe, up on the basic QDN website on Cordal, but that would be great to get all of the Archaics material eventually up there. So it is, and also it's on a blockchain that is, transparent, run by people. So it's historically now set forever. And benchmark, so it cannot be wiped. So anyways, I know people get triggered by that word blockchain, but it can be used for great good and great evil. And
I really don't know anything about it. I don't know anything about cryptocurrency, and I don't know anything about blockchain.
Well, I'm saying proud that Cordal doesn't call ourselves a crypto. But that being said, thanks so much, Jason. Go support him. Love you, man. Really love your videos. They're always super fun and entertaining. Those new to Jason, go check him out. Go support him. And we'll see you guys next week. Also, hopefully see you at Music and Sky in person. It's coming here before you know it, musicandsky.com. If you want $100 off at Music and Sky, use the coupon AlfaVedic23. AlfaVedic is going to give $100 off to our fans now to Music and Sky tickets. Thanks, guys. Love you. We'll see you next week, Thursday, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Take it easy, Jason.
You too.